Part 26. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 251. Ye Chen just smiled. Before, it was now, but now I don't like it anymore, so I rejected this project. I'm a little tired, so I'll go back and rest. After Ye Chen finished speaking, he got up and went upstairs. This boy usually obeys that woman's words, but why would he refuse now, that little girl? After Xiaolin thought of this, she felt more and more that something was wrong. After thinking of this, he quickly called Ye Chen's father. "Old man, our son is a little unusual today. Not normal? What's wrong?" After Xiaolin explained the matter to Ye Tian in detail, Ye Tian just smiled. "Isn't this a good thing? What's the use of that woman besides being pretty? Even if our son is in such good condition, he doesn't like it. If he misses our son, that's hers loss. That's not what I'm talking about. Why do you think our son suddenly changed his temper? I don't know about this, but it's a good thing. Do you think it's because our boy hasn't been able to catch up with that woman for so long that he now likes a man?" At this time, Ye Chen, who was eavesdropping, and Ye Tian, who was on the other end of the phone, both spat out a mouthful of blood at the same time. After Xiaolin heard Ye Chen's movements, she hung up the phone. "Come out, I know you haven't slept. Tell me, what is going on? I still have some things to do. I'll go and do some business first. As for this matter, I'll explain it to you later." Ye Chen quickly slipped out. Xiaolin looked at Ye Chen's back and sighed faintly. "Oh, I just hope this kid will never do anything stupid." After Ye Chen slipped out, he received a call from Linrura. "Brother Ye, I've finished rehearsing here, but it's too late and I can't get a taxi. Can you come and pick me up?" Based on Ye Chen's character in the past, he would have rushed over to pick up Linrura. But now, Ye Chen just replied with 2 words coldly, "No." Then he hung up the phone immediately. When Linrura heard the beeping sound coming from the other end of the phone, she stamped her feet angrily. But at this moment, Linrura's inner impression of Ye Chen actually changed. At this time, Qin Feng came to Linrura. "What's wrong? Do you want to go watch a movie together? There is a movie recently." Before Qin Feng finished speaking, Linrura uttered 2 words coldly, "No." After saying that, Linrura turned and left. Qin Feng looked at Linrura's retreating back with a bit more viciousness in his eyes. "One day I will pin you down and make you beg for mercy." After Ye Chen walked for a while, he suddenly realized that he didn't even have a single friend in this huge city of Shangjing, not counting the friends he usually ate and drank with. At this time, Ye Chen suddenly felt a little sad. At this time, Qin Feng, after being rejected by Linrura, invited a senior sister who was 1 year older than him to go out for a walk together. After Qin Feng saw Ye Chen, perhaps because he was a little angry about what happened just now, he actually came straight to Ye Chen. "Hello, classmate Ye." After Ye Chen heard Qin Feng's voice, he didn't even raise his head, but responded coldly, "Okay." Ye Chen's appearance made Qin Feng a little unhappy. "Dignified young master Ye, shouldn't you always be surrounded by beauties? Why is there only one of you today? I'm different from you in that I'm not picky about food. Xiewaner is also the school beauty in this school, and she is no less generous than Linrura. Now that someone is talking about her like this, of course she feels very unhappy." "Hey, what do you mean?" Ye Chen slowly raised his head and glanced at this beautiful woman. Just one glance was enough to shock her. She has willow eyebrows, red and phoenix eyes, a pair of eyes, a spring face, a small nose, and a high nose bridge, which is quite 3-dimensional. At this moment, Ye Chen was thinking in his mind, although this bastard is a poor loser, there are actually a lot of beauties around him. This beauty must be too upright. Just in time, After snatching this woman away from you, I should be able to take it. Get the points? Ye Chen made up his mind and just glanced at Xie Wan'er. A woman's beauty comes from the inside out, so what does it matter if you are beautiful? In poetry, you are not as good as Murongqiangxiu. In poetry, you are not as good as Situ Ningbing. Apart from being more beautiful, you are useless at anything else. This was the first time someone said this to Xie Wan'er. At this time, Xie Wan'er was also very angry. Qin Feng was willing to see two people having conflicts and fanning the flames. Who said that? Wan'er, you have feelings that no one else has, so why do you have to compare yourself with others? Then you mean, I'm just a vase, right? Don't contact me in the future, just go for a walk by yourself. As Xie Wan'er said that, she turned around and left. Qin Feng looked at Xie Wan'er's back and felt like crying without tears. Originally, he should have spent time before and after the moon, but now he is like this. Perhaps because he was walking too hastily, Xie Wan'er actually sprained his foot. After Qin Feng saw this scene, he hurried up and pretended to be concerned, but was pushed away by Xie Wan'er. At this time, Ye Chen had an evil smile on his lips. He walked directly to Xie Wan'er's side, and then he didn't even ask, and directly picked up Xie Wan'er. For such a lonely and arrogant woman, unless you can domineeringly make her unable to refuse, otherwise you have no chance of winning. Xie Wan'er gently pushed Ye Chen, "Let me go." Ye Chen ignored Xie Wan'er at all, and said to himself, "You can go and read Nalan's poems when you have time, it's easier to understand." At this time, Xie Wan'er's pretty face turned red, and she subconsciously hummed. At this moment, Ye Chen's heart can be said to be full of joy. Qin Feng saw that he was robbed of his love, and stood there, his face began to become more and more gloomy. "Asshole, I must make you pay the price." All that Ye Chen did was just to force Qin Feng. The harder Qin Feng chased, the more Linrura would have a way, and the less Linrura had a way, she would come to beg him at that time. At that time, I just need to catch Linrura in my palm. If Lin Yu is really related to Linrura, then I want to take those strange beasts on Lin Yu as my own, and it will be just around the corner, even if they are not related. I can also ask Linrura to use the beauty trap. Anyway, looking at Lin Yu, it doesn't seem like he can resist the beauty trap. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Shengchang. Chapter 252. When Ye Chen thought of this, a meaningful smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. At this time, his face began to become more sinister, and the smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. Got up. But at this moment, Lin Yu didn't know why, but he always seemed to feel that something bad was going to happen. Lin Yu half squinted his eyes, a bit of gloom flashed in his eyes, and at this time he frowned slightly. Strange, why do I always have such a bad feeling? What on earth is going on? Who is this bastard who wants to plot against me secretly? At this moment, Lin Yu, after thinking of this, seemed to have a somewhat complicated color in his eyes, and then the editor couldn't help but raise his eyebrows slightly. There was no talking all night, and the next morning. When Lin Yu woke up early the next morning, he found a secluded place and released the souls of Lin Yu and the space-time beast. You must have heard everything my wife said just now. If you have any ideas, please tell me. Of course, heading to the Tower of Reincarnation. Lin Yu nodded lightly, I can no longer go with you now. After all, the knowledge from outside the territory is imminent. Most of the hands in this ancient world have been swallowed up by the monsters from outside the territory. The monsters from outside the territory are now getting stronger and stronger. I have to leave. Lin Yu's face evoked a hint of helplessness. At this time, his eyes were filled with a desolate and tragic look. After Lin Yu heard what he said, a complicated light flashed in his eyes, and then he nodded slightly. What you said is indeed true, So do I have to go to the stage of reincarnation by myself? The man nodded lightly, yes, you have to go to the stage of reincarnation by yourself now, but nothing will happen to you. Only the soul body can approach the stage of reincarnation. After all, it belongs to heaven. Holy objects, there are some rules that I can't change. There was a hint of fear in the man's eyes. It was obvious that he had been severely punished by heaven for some of his previous unnatural actions, which made him extremely cautious at the moment. After Lin Yu saw the man like this, he nodded solemnly, with a hint of determination flashing in his eyes. Don't worry, even if I go by myself, I will be sure this time. As if he had remembered something, the man turned his head and glanced at Lin Yu, with a faint smile on his lips. You should keep this thing, it might be useful later. As he spoke, the man handed Lin Yu a simple token. Lin Yu looked at the token for a long time and then turned his head to look at the man, with a hint of excitement flashing in his eyes. A look of confusion. What exactly is the function of this token? The man smiled, it's not of much use, it just saves your life. When Lin Yu heard what the man said, there was a look of gratitude in his eyes. He nodded gently, okay, I can't thank you enough for the kindness, but I still have to thank you for these things. The man glanced at Lin Yu angrily, there's no need to distinguish between you and me. Okay, I still have some things to deal with. Without further ado, I think your soul power is also good enough, there's not much left, now it's better to find that thing quickly and get out of here. Lin Yu nodded solemnly, and then headed towards the East China Sea. After he disappeared for a moment, a woman's figure faintly appeared beside Lin Yu. The woman turned her head and glanced at Lin Yu, with a few meaningful words raised at the corners of her mouth. Smile. Is this who you will be in the future? The woman's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu. Lin Yu was not surprised at all. He just smiled and nodded softly, yes, it seems that I can live for a long time, but then maybe I'll forget some things as time passes. Nuwa smiled, then will you forget me? Lin Yu was stunned at this moment. After seeing Lin Yu like this, Nuwa's heart suddenly hurt, but after a moment, a smile was forced out of her face. I believe that my husband will never forget me. After all, there are not many goddesses as good as me. Lin Yu gently held Nuwa in his arms, and then gently stroked the hair on her forehead. Yes, such a good wife, if I forget about it, I'm afraid I'll be in trouble when the time comes. I can't find it, so I will never forget it. Lin Yu's eyes flashed with a hint of determination. At this moment, Nuwa's little head was gently arched in Lin Yu's arms. After the two of them marched for a while, Lin Yu suddenly felt a little tired for some reason. After all, his soul did not belong to this era, so his soul power was particularly consumed at this moment. That person didn't, he was talking about Lin Yu. Staying with him these days, his soul power was even more consumed. The reason why Lin Yu felt that there was no problem in that person's sea of consciousness was entirely because that man was secretly using his soul power to nourish Lin Yu's soul. In fact, the man made up his mind the night before and realized that if he went to the sea of the North Ming dynasty, it would be very unlucky, so the man made the temporary decision to let Lin Yu go on his own. After all, if I fall now, I will have nothing to do with my future life. But at this moment, Lin Yu only felt that he was very tired. He fell to the top of a mountain. There was an ancient tree on the mountain. When Lin Yu approached the ancient tree, an emerald green light directly enveloped Lin Yu. Lin Yu was slightly shocked at first, but after a moment he felt the spring breeze. Lin Yu's eyes were staring straight at this ancient tree, with a special light flashing in his eyes. At this time, the corners of his eyes and brows were filled with excitement. This ancient tree is so powerful, I was really surprised. At this time, Lin Yu glanced around the ancient tree. He found that there were some mysterious and obscure lines on the ancient tree, which he could not understand at all. At this time, Lin Yu's eyes were quite confused, and he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows slightly. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji-Sheng Chong. Chapter 253. It's amazing. It's really amazing. I didn't expect there to be such a magical ancient tree in this world. Thank you for saving me this time. As Lin Yu said this, he bowed to the ancient tree, with a special color in his eyes. But at this moment, the ancient tree actually spoke like this. Little guy, time and space are the foundation of heaven and earth and the foundation of all things. It is not an exaggeration to say that you will suffer such serious backlash when traveling through time and space. When Lin Yu heard what the ancient tree said, a special color appeared in his eyes. Then what should I do now? A bit of confusion flashed across Lin Yu's eyes. At this time, he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows slightly, and his eyes were quite complicated. After hearing what Lin Yu said, the ancient tree just smiled. Actually, it's not difficult to break the situation, but... Just what? It's just that after all these eons, you need to do me a favor. When Lin Yu heard what the ancient tree said, he nodded solemnly, no problem. At this time, the ancient tree just laughed like this, you didn't even ask me what it was about, and you just agreed so happily? What if you can't do it? What if what I ask you to do will happen? Where's your life? Lin Yu just smiled, you can't. At this time, the ancient tree was rather strange. Why do you say that? Because of a feeling. After Gu Shu heard Lin Yu say this, he also smiled slightly, and then nodded lightly. Actually, it's not a big deal, but you must remember it. In the 58th year of the apocalypse, you need to go to the Sea of Biming again. At that time, in the Sea of Biming, there was a small place 3,000 miles westward. Island, there is a small sapling on the island. When the time comes, I need you to water it with 7 tears. If you can agree to this, I will save you. If you don't agree, then there is nothing I can do to help you. Of course I agree. Okay. You take this thing first, and if you carry it with you, your soul will be unharmed within 7 days. At this time, a wooden sword suddenly appeared in Lin Yu's hand. This wooden sword was engraved with a swimming dragon. Although the sword was made of wood, Lin Yu felt a strange feeling. Hard feeling. He waved his hand gently, and then a burst of emerald green sword energy quietly and violently swept out from the sword body. This sword energy cut through the sky, crossing north and south, as if it wanted to split the world. Lin Yu was stunned when he saw this scene. He never expected that this wooden sword would have such power. This sword is called the Tianmu sword. Its attribute is wood. It can kill evil spirits, kill strange beasts, attack other people's souls, and damage other people's Dao foundation. Therefore, you must use it with caution. If you use it incorrectly, it will be harmful to the world. It's a disaster. At this time, Lin Yu also nodded so heavily, with a special light flashing in his eyes, Junior, I understand. As soon as Lin Yu finished speaking, he felt that the scene around him had quietly changed. Originally, he was on a mountain, but now the place he was in had turned into a seaside. Which is quite puzzling. Even Lin Yu never expected that during his trip to the sea, he would encounter the ancient sycamore tree and obtain the Tianmu divine sword. This really surprised him. Master, be careful, there are powerful beasts nearby, Arya's voice rang in Lin Yu's mind. After the system upgrade, with Arya, Lin Yu could predict many dangers in advance, which was also of great help to Lin Yu. At this time, Lin Yu looked around, and his eyes suddenly evoked a bit of solemnity. At this moment, he couldn't help but adjust it slightly, but then he just half squinted. Eyes opened. It's interesting. It's really interesting. I didn't expect to encounter such a thing this time. You actually called me. It's quite unexpected. After hearing what Lin Yu said, the space-time beast's eyes flashed with confusion. At this moment, the space-time beast couldn't help but frown slightly. Did you notice something? The eyes of the space-time beast were staring directly at Lin Yu, and at this time, Lin Yu nodded slightly, with some complicated colors in his eyes. That's right, there is a very powerful aura around here. It must be a strange beast from this ancient world. It is self-evident how terrifying this strange beast is. At this moment, everyone heard a tiger roar, and then a white tiger suddenly appeared in front of everyone. The white tiger had 2 wings on its back, stepped on auspicious clouds, and became colorful. Exotic beast, White Tiger Deo Realm Level 10, Level 50. Qualification, Alien, Top. Life, 9999999999999999999999999. Speed, 9999999999999999999. Defense, 99999999999999999. Attack, 99999999999999999. Skill, unknown. The white tiger stared at Lin Yu with a cold look in his eyes. At this moment, after seeing the terrifying strength of the white tiger, Lin Yu couldn't help but show a little panic in his eyes. You should know that no matter how strong Lin Yu is now, even if he is one day stronger than you, he can't be in the 10th level of the Deo realm and have any ability to resist the beast. The white tiger roared at Lin Yu, and at this time Lin Yu felt that his soul was trembling slightly. The white tiger suddenly rushed forward, and the space-time beast at this moment actually blocked Lin Yu directly, and roared angrily, as if warning the white tiger. At this moment, the white tiger actually stopped. Ha ha ha, I didn't expect such a little kid would dare to yell at me. But considering that you are loyal to the master, I will not pursue the matter. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 254. At this moment, Lin Yu was naturally very excited after seeing the scene just now. Lin Yu was also somewhat moved by the time and space beast. At this time, Bai Hu turned his head and glanced at Lin Yu. He seemed to be aware of something strange in Lin Yu's body. At this time, Bai Hu actually frowned like this. Strange, why is the aura on your little guy so strange? Bai Hu's eyes were staring straight at Lin Yu. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what Bai Hu said, a strange light flashed in his eyes, and he couldn't help but frown slightly. I don't understand what you mean. After Bai Hu heard what Lin Yu said, he just waved his huge tiger claws so gently. A few days ago, an immortal guided me and said that there is a noble person of mine here. After waiting for a long time, I could only when you are alone. I guess you are right. When Lin Yu heard Bai Hu say this, he couldn't help but feel dumb for a while. Then what? But at this time, Lin Yu saw the disgusted look on Bai Hu's face. The cultivation level is so low, and the mount is not that good, otherwise I'd better wait. How could you possibly be able to solve me on your own? Where's the trouble? The white tiger looked at Lin Yu with a bit of contempt. At this time, after Lin Yu heard Bai Hu say this, he was speechless for a while. He glanced at Bai Hu angrily. What do you mean by this? Tell me clearly. Bai Hu just glanced at Lin Yu. What's the point? It doesn't seem to be interesting. Isn't what I said the truth? Your strength is too weak, it's simply not enough to look at. Lin Yu. Okay, since the seniors have said so, the juniors will not bother you anymore. The juniors still have some things to do, so I will leave first. At this time, Lin Yu just wanted to leave, but the white tiger actually stopped in front of Lin Yu. I just remembered that the immortal said that as long as you are the first person who passes by, you are my noble one. After so many days, you are indeed the first person I meet and interact with. It seems that you are not wrong. Lin Yu. But my strength and cultivation are so low, obviously I can't help you solve those troublesome things, Senior, so Senior must have made a mistake. Please find someone else. At this time, the white tiger let out a roar from his mouth, and that roar seemed to affect Lin Yu's soul. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what Baihu said, some complicated colors arose in his eyes. He turned his head and stared directly at Baihu, with something strange flashing in his eyes. I don't know what Senior means. Baihu just smiled, it's not interesting. If you come here to help me, I can take you to the Sea of Biming. As for whether you can find the platform of reincarnation, that's up to you. After Lin Yu heard Baihu say this, a look of disbelief flashed through his pupils. At this time, he stared directly at Baihu. How did you know that I was going to Biming? Is Hai going to the platform of reincarnation? After Baihu heard what Lin Yu said, he looked even happier than Lin Yu. At this time, he was staring straight at Lin Yu. As expected, the immortal did not lie to me, you are indeed me the noble man. At this time, 3 black lines appeared on Lin Yu's forehead. Then what exactly do I need to help you with? Actually, it's not a big deal. I just need to help me deduce how to interpret this formation. The white tiger stepped lightly, and then a burst of golden light appeared under his feet. In an instant, 99 and 81 light pillars appeared around Lin Yu. The paintings on these 99 and 81 light pillars were engraved on them. The lines look somewhat similar, but also somewhat different. However, from a distance, these lines are invisible, and only the golden light can be seen. When Lin Yu saw this scene, a look of disbelief flashed in his eyes. At this time, he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows slightly, and a bit of complexity flashed in his eyes. It's strange. It's really strange. How could it be like this? The white tiger just waved its 2 wings and stood next to Lin Yu. This is just a formation, but no matter how I try to crack it, it doesn't work. The immortal said a few days ago that only this formation can only be broken after meeting you. The white tiger put its head on the huge tiger's head, and a hint of helplessness flashed in its eyes. At this moment, Lin Yu was on the verge of tears. A somewhat sad smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. This formation is too mysterious and weird. To be honest, even I may not be able to do it real crack, so this. Lin Yu paused as he said this. He turned his head and stared directly at Baihu, with a hint of helplessness flashing in his eyes. At this moment, Baihu, after hearing what Lin Yu said, his brows were like this, as if they were knitted together. What the immortal said is definitely not wrong. The immortal knew for 500 years before and 500 years after. He knows everything. He even knows that you are going to the Sea of the North Dark. How could he be wrong? The brain circuit of this white tiger is also very strange. At this time, Lin Yu just thought that this big guy would not put all his intelligence on the strength. To be honest, I really don't have a way to break this. If I have a way to break it, how could I not tell you? Stop talking nonsense. If there is no way to break it, then think about it quickly. Stop talking nonsense. At this time, Lin Yu also knew that he probably couldn't break this trap, and this white tiger might not let him go. After thinking for a while, Lin Yu made a seal with his hands, and then sat cross-legged, looking at his nose and his heart, and entered a state of meditation. After a while, Lin Yu felt that he was in a fierce ocean, and these forces gathered towards Lin Yu desperately. Such a powerful force made Lin Yu's body conscious and a little uncontrollable. When Lin Yu thought of this at this moment, a sad smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were full of helplessness. After a moment, he just sighed heavily. Survival of the beasts, awakening the beast taming system at the beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 255. Lin Yu carefully began to stir up the power of his soul, and invaded the formation bit by bit. However, no matter how he tried to crack the formation, he would always reach a critical moment and forcefully the power of the soul was ejected. After Lin Yu tried several times, at this moment, he only felt a surge of blood in his chest, and then a mouthful of blood spurted out. At this time, Lin Yu's face also turned pale, and his breath was even a little unstable at this moment. It was not until this moment that Lin Yu adjusted his breath a little and then slowly came back to his senses. At this time, the white tiger looked at Lin Yu with a smile on his face, full of expectation, and couldn't bear to tell him the news. "How's it going? Do you have any clues?" A sad smile appeared at the corner of Lin Yu's mouth, and a hint of helplessness flashed through his eyes. At this time, he just shook his head. Baihu, who was originally full of expectations, suddenly felt a little sad in his eyes at this moment. A somewhat sad smile appeared at the corner of Baihu's mouth. "Is it possible that the immortal is really lying to me? But little guy, you are already in this dilemma now. This dilemma should be an innate situation, which is very different from this acquired formation. This should be unique. The creation of heaven and earth, I'm afraid this formation has given birth to formation spirits." Lin Yu had no clue at first, but when he heard Baihu say this, Lin Yu seemed to have remembered something. He turned his head and stared straight at it. "Baihu," a bit of excitement flashed in his eyes. "What did you say? Say it again. Is the immortal lying to me? That's not the sentence. You little guy is also in this dilemma. If this dilemma is not solved, you, the little guy, won't be able to get out at all. That's not the case either. This dilemma should be an innate situation, which is completely different from this acquired formation. This should be a unique creation of heaven and earth. I am afraid that this formation has already given birth to formation spirits." "That's right, it's the formation spirit. If this formation has a spirit, then everything will be explained. No wonder every time I use the power of my soul to check, I feel that the formation is better than before. It's different. In this case, the formation spirit should be behind it." At this time, Baihu heard Lin Yu. After saying this, Baihu, who had already fallen into despair, actually had a hint of hope flashing in his eyes. Baihu's eyes were staring straight at Lin Yu. "If that's the case, then you have a solution, right?" Lin Yu nodded gently. "Yes, there is a solution." At this time, Baihu felt a burst of excitement in his heart. A tiger roar resounded throughout the world, and the surrounding space faintly trembled. At this time, the sound of roaring tigers could be heard endlessly. After Lin Yu heard the tiger's roar, he felt that his soul would have been shaken away by now if it were not for the Tianmu sword. After a while, the white tiger finally calmed down. He looked at Lin Yu with a smile on his face. At this time, the white tiger's gaze made Lin Yu feel a little weak. "What's the matter? Now that you know this, does it mean that you already have this solution?" A somewhat sad smile appeared at the corner of Lin Yu's mouth, and a hint of helplessness flashed through his eyes. "Although I know this, I'm afraid it will be quite difficult if I want to deal with it." After the white tiger heard what Lin Yu said, his eyes that were originally flashing with excitement turned slightly gloomy. At this time, he spoke to Lin Yu in a low voice. "If you have any ideas, just tell me and I'll figure it out. It's better to have hope than to have no hope at all." When Lin Yu heard Baihu say this, a few different colors flashed in his eyes. "First of all, I am the body of a divine soul, you should be able to tell this." Lin Yu turned around and glanced at Baihu. At this time, Baihu also nodded slightly. "Then what?" At this time, Lin Yu had a bit of helplessness in his eyes, and a sad smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. "I am very weak now, you should be able to feel it." After Baihu heard what Lin Yu said, he instantly understood what Lin Yu wanted to say. I can indeed feel that you are indeed not strong now, so you are saying that you need to increase the strength of your soul to break the game, right? Lin Yu nodded lightly, yes, with my current soul strength, although I have understood these issues and the key points, it is still very difficult to deduce this formation, and I need your help. Lin Yu's eyes were staring straight at Baihu, with a bit of complexity in his eyes. At this time, Baihu heard Lin Yu and pondered for a moment after saying this. After a moment, he gritted his teeth and said, I hate people lying to me the most. If you dare to lie to me, even if I can improve your strength, you will never be my opponent after you become stronger. Lin Yu just smiled and said, believe it or not, I have no other choice now. The white tiger nodded at the huge tiger head, and then Lin Yu felt a pure soul power, which seemed to be nourishing his soul. At this time, a small white tiger suddenly appeared on the white tiger's forehead. It was a phantom, but it looked quite solid, as if it had a real body. At this time, Lin Yu was being nourished by the white tiger's soul power. At this time, a few special colors flashed in his eyes. At this moment, he held his breath and concentrated. After a moment, he felt that his soul seemed to be about to transform. At this time, Lin Yu's soul realm was probably in the human realm, and above this human realm became the semi-immortal realm. At this moment, Lin Yu could clearly feel his soul, which was transforming bit by bit as if it was about to be reborn. Around Lin Yu's soul, his skin began to crack little by little, but the feeling of cracked skin did not cause him any discomfort. Instead, it was like breaking free from restraints, and his soul began to slowly feel as if it was reborn. The feeling was so mysterious that it could not be described in words. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 256. At this moment, Lin Yu felt that his soul was gradually getting dressed after accepting the nourishment of the white tiger. At this time, the corners of his eyes and eyebrows were filled with excitement. The corners of Lin Yu's mouth raised slightly, with a playful arc. This feeling is really wonderful, this feeling is really wonderful. Is this the feeling of power in the legend? At this time, Lin Yu's soul gradually began to solidify, while Baihu's soul gradually weakened a bit. But after a while, the white tiger's soul began to weaken unlike before. The transmission of soul power came to an abrupt end. When the transmission of soul power ended, Lin Yu's face was slightly shocked, and a look of surprise flashed in his eyes. Why stop? Lin Yu turned his head, staring directly at Baihu. At this time, after Baihu heard what Lin Yu said, a strange light flashed in his eyes, and finally his brows furrowed. So tied together. What is the reason for this? Is it possible that you don't know? Baihu's eyes stared straight at Lin Yu, a bit of coldness flashing in his eyes. At this moment, after hearing what Baihu said, Lin Yu also scratched his head and smiled. Okay, I will try to break the formation again now, this will be okay. Baihu nodded slightly, and then glared at Lin Yu fiercely. You'd better not be careful, you should understand what I said. Lin Yu just smiled and didn't say anything more. But at this moment, Lin Yu suddenly discovered that this predicament, which had no murderous intent at first, now revealed some murderous intent in this case. Lin Yu felt that after reaching this point, his face was slightly startled, and a strange light flashed in his eyes. At this time, his brows seemed to be knitted together. How is it possible? Is it possible that this formation spirit can know our thoughts? Of course, Baihu could clearly feel the murderous intent in this predicament. At this moment, he turned his head and glanced towards Lin Yu. There was a sense of helplessness in the corners of his eyes and brows. Oh, if I had known I shouldn't have come here in the first place, it's really troublesome now. When Baihu thought of this, a wry smile appeared on his lips, and a hint of helplessness flashed in his eyes. And just after this moment, just between a breath and a breath, everything around seemed to be twisted into a ball. In the originally calm predicament, murderous intent was everywhere at this moment. Lin Yu suddenly took a step forward, and then formed seals with his hands. At this time, Lin Yu wanted to try it. As expected, the formation formed by Lin Yu was better than this dilemma. To put it bluntly, it's like a child's existence. Lin Yu didn't take this dilemma seriously at all and just solved it casually. After the dilemma was resolved, Lin Yu also suffered a severe backlash. After taking several steps back, he managed to stabilize his body, and then a mouthful of blood came out. After spraying out like this, his soul, which had begun to solidify, became dim again at this moment. At this time, the pressure around them began to suddenly become more intense, and the extremely terrifying pressure around them suddenly converged on them. Lin Yu felt that after such a strong sense of oppression around him, his face was like this, slightly condensed, and a few strange colors flashed in his eyes. At this time, his brows were like this, as if they were tightly together. Asshole, damn it, damn it. At this time, after seeing this scene, Baihu realized that he had indeed done something wrong. A bitter smile appeared on the corner of Baihu's mouth, and his eyes were full of helplessness. What now? What now? At this moment, after Lin Yu heard Baihu say this, he half closed his eyes. After thinking for a moment, he just shook his head helplessly. My soul power is not enough. If it is my soul, if you have enough strength, you might still be able to fight him now, but no matter what. After Lin Yu said this, he turned around and glanced at Baihu. Of course he understood what Lin Yu meant. At this time, he gritted his teeth. It seems like it's really what the immortal said. Let me ask you something. Baihu's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, with a bit of perseverance flashing in his eyes. At this time, when Lin Yu heard this, after Baihu said this, a bit of determination flashed in his eyes. A look of confusion. If you have anything to ask, just ask. Who are you? Are you protected by the 9-dragon soul? Baihu could clearly feel that Lin Yu's soul power was extraordinary, so at this time, he asked Lin Yu directly. Lin Yu was slightly stunned at first, but after a moment he nodded slightly. Of course I have 9 dragon souls protecting me. Not only do I have 9 dragon souls protecting my body, but I also have 10 dragon souls. I wonder if you ask what do these do? Okay, I'm willing to turn into a soul to protect you, but every 100 years, you have to let me go for 1 year. This is my condition. Lin Yu never thought that the white tiger would be willing to be his bodyguard soul. He was overjoyed at this moment. Not to mention that the white tiger only said that it would take 100 years to place it for 1 year. I am afraid that even if he said that it would take 10 years to place it for 1 year, Lin Yu would agree. Of course there is no problem with this, everything is as you wish. At this time, the white tiger turned into a stream of light and sank into Lin Yu's sea of consciousness. At this time, he heard the white tiger say, "Don't be happy too early, it's not time for you to be happy yet." Lin Yu's face condensed slightly, and a bit of confusion flashed in his eyes. At this moment, he couldn't understand why the white tiger said this. I don't know what you mean by that. If you want to merge my soul, you must have extremely strong soul power, but your soul power is not enough. If it weren't for the 9-dragon soul protecting your body, I'm afraid that if my soul entered your sea of consciousness, you would explode and die. Lin Yu never thought that there was such a thing. At this time, his face was so shocked. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 257. But I don't notice anything wrong now. So what's going on? At this time, the white tiger didn't know how to answer after hearing what Lin Yu said. I don't know much about this. But at this moment, the white tiger seemed to have noticed something wrong. His face suddenly sank, and there was a flash of disbelief in his eyes. 10 dragon souls, who are you? Where did you get these 10 dragon souls? At this time, Lin Yu just scratched his head and smiled. I got them by chance in the misty forest earlier. It's not worth mentioning, not worth mentioning. These 10 dragon souls can cross time and space to accompany you. It must be very difficult. It seems that you are not simple. The white tiger said softly. At this time, Lin Yu just smiled and didn't say anything more. And when the souls of the two of them began to merge, Lin Yu felt like a small cup, and countless springs suddenly poured into it. He felt like he was about to split apart. His face turned pale, and he covered his head with his hands, making a painful sound. Lin Yu rolled back and forth, screaming again and again. At this time, the surface of his soul suddenly burst, then healed again, and then burst again. This cycle repeated for an unknown period of time. A young man holding a folding fan in the distance seemed to be quite unhappy after seeing this scene. The young man's face suddenly sank, and his eyes were quite cold. Asshole, damn it! The young man didn't know why he felt a strong sense of oppression from Lin Yu. At this time, his face began to become ugly little by little, and a few strange colors flashed in his eyes. And just after this moment, the young man seemed to have made up his mind, and manipulated a disc with both hands. At this moment, the dilemma turned into a killing array. The countless fierce and domineering spiritual powers gathered together and pressed towards Lin Yu, and suddenly pressed over. But Lin Yu, who was sitting cross-legged in the middle, seemed to have been accustomed to this pain. This strong pressure did not crush his soul, but looked at him calmly. After seeing this scene, Sidhu's face was also shocked, and his eyes were full of disbelief. At this time, he just shook his head so frantically. Impossible, this is absolutely impossible, how could it be like this? This guy's strength, how could this guy's strength be so terrible? Sidhu's face was full of shock, a face full of panic, and his eyes were full of disbelief. At this moment, he couldn't imagine that all this was true. So at this time, Sidhu subconsciously stepped back a few steps, and then immediately began to prepare to spy on Lin Yu. But when he really went deep into Lin Yu's sea of consciousness, the 10 dragons opened their eyes instantly, staring at Sidhu, and then spit out a word coldly, "Get lost." After the dragon said this, Sidhu felt his soul was in turmoil, and then he suddenly retreated several steps to the back, and then he barely stabilized his body, and then he spit out a mouthful of blood. This guy is definitely weird, this guy is definitely weird. Sidhu swallowed his saliva, and his eyes and eyebrows were full of panic. And at this moment, Sidhu spit out a mouthful of blood from his mouth, his eyes were full of panic, and at this moment his eyes and eyebrows were completely short-sighted, and he was in a state of panic. Sidhu's eyes were fixed on the front of him, with some special colors flashing in his eyes, and some complex meanings between his eyebrows. At this time, Lin Yu suddenly woke up and flashed some strangeness in his eyes. At this time, he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows slightly. After a moment, he seemed to remember something, and then he suddenly opened his eyes. Sure enough, after having the blessing of the white tiger spirit, Lin Yu was like suddenly enlightened at this time, and understood many things in an instant. At this time, he couldn't help but smile slightly, and then he gently formed an extremely mysterious and obscure palm print in front of him. And just after this moment, a mysterious power rose quietly, and then Sidhu's appearance slowly appeared in front of Lin Yu. Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on Sidhu's mouth, and a faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. "You've trapped us for so long, and now you finally show up." Lin Yu stared at Sidhu with a hint of teasing in his eyes. When Sidhu heard what Lin Yu said, a hint of gloom flashed in his eyes, and a murderous intent quietly emerged from his body. "Asshole, damn it!" Lin Yu stared at Sidhu with a smile on his face, as if he was looking at something very interesting. At this time, Sidhu's aura became a little different. Lin Yu suddenly took a step forward, and then the mysterious aura on his body was suddenly released, and the space around him was also turbulent, and the mysterious power between heaven and earth was urgently condensed in one place. Sidhu stared at Lin Yu coldly, and the murderous intent on his body suddenly rose, and the murderous intention suddenly appeared. There was a burst of flying sand and rocks between heaven and earth, and the surrounding world was suddenly in turmoil. The two people confronted each other, and just between this breath, Sidhu suddenly rushed towards Lin Yu. Sidhu's speed was extremely fast, and in an instant, he condensed into a ball. Then in the surrounding killing array, murderous intent and murderous intentions were everywhere. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu couldn't help but take a deep breath and calm down his mood a little. And just after this moment, Lin Yu seemed to suddenly understand something. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji-Sheng Chang. Chapter 258. Interesting, it's really interesting. But at this moment, in the void, a mysterious aura suddenly condensed from the heaven and earth. And in this instant, both sides suddenly retreated away from each other. Lin Yu's brows seemed to be knitted together, and at this moment, there was a somewhat proud smile on the corner of Sidhu's mouth. Sidhu just glanced coldly at Lin Yu. The coldness in his eyes began to become more and more obvious. He's still trying to fight me. I think he's just looking for death. No, let him go. He is strong enough to destroy you, but you are not strong enough to kill him. A white-haired young man gently caressed the Yaoqin and sat next to Sidhu. Sidhu stared straight at the white-haired young man, with a bit of confusion flashing in his eyes, and then he shook his head. No, are you sure? Obviously, Sidhu seemed to be somewhat suspicious of the white-haired young man at this time. At this time, when the white-haired young man heard what Sidhu said, he just shook his head and smiled, with a hint of ridicule in his eyes. Not sure, but some things can be called interesting. After Sidhu heard what the white-haired young man said, a bit of confusion flashed in his eyes. At this time, the way he looked at the white-haired young man seemed a bit strange. What can be called interesting? Come and tell me about it. The white-haired young man just shook his head slightly. Everything can be called interesting, and everything can be called boring. It is difficult to define the words interesting and boring. The voice of the white-haired young man was very gentle, but at this moment, Sidhu was confused for a while. The white-haired young man looked at Sidhu, as if he couldn't understand the meaning of what he said, and then smiled like this: "It's normal that you don't understand. The 10 dragon souls on his body are not. The Emperor of Heaven is no better than a vegetarian. 9 dragons protect the body. Who do you think can use 10 dragon souls to protect the body?" After Sidhu heard the white-haired young man say this, his pupils suddenly enlarged, and a bit of disbelief flashed in his eyes. Then he turned his head and stared directly at the white-haired young man. "You mean?" The white-haired young man just nodded slightly, and the smile at the corner of his mouth began to become more obvious than before. "You guessed it right." At this moment, a bit of disbelief flashed in the eyes of the white-haired young man. At this time, his face was also full of panic. After this moment, the white-haired young man seemed to understand something. The helplessness in his eyes and between his eyebrows began to become more obvious than before. Maybe that's the case, but it's still a bit of a headache." After waiting for this moment, the white-haired young man's expression condensed slightly. He looked up in front of him and said lightly, "Your formation is about to be broken. If you don't go now, it will be too late." At this time, Sidhu raised his eyes after hearing what the white-haired young man said, and then he saw Lin Yu, who had actually used half of the formation. Sidhu's face was shocked, and his eyes were full of disbelief. At this time, he couldn't help but take a breath. Sidhu suddenly appeared in front of Lin Yu. At this time, he was looking at Lin Yu carefully. He recalled the dragon soul thing before, and Sidhu's eyes became a little weird. Got up. Who are you? If you don't untie this formation quickly, then I will kill you. If you untie this formation quickly, then maybe the two of us can become friends. Lin Yu spoke unhurriedly like this. After all, he had just absorbed Baihu's divine power, which gave his soul a qualitative breakthrough. He had majestic soul power that could be used to dismantle this formation. At this time, Sidhu took a deep breath, and after a moment, he glanced coldly at Lin Yu. In his eyes, the cold look between his eyebrows made people feel a little bit, a very shuddering feeling. After waiting for this moment, Lin Yu seemed to suddenly understand something, and his expression condensed slightly. In just the blink of an eye, more than 30 formations were broken again. Of course Sidhu understood that if Lin Yu continued to break the formation like this, his own formations would not be enough for him to solve. At this time, Sidhu just collapsed on the ground, with a bitter smile at the corner of his mouth. I give up. It's okay if I let you go. After Lin Yu saw Sidhu surrendering to him, the smile on the corner of his mouth began to become more and more obvious. At this time, he stared at Sidhu with a smile on his face, and he looked at Sidhu Deo quite a bit. The creepiness. You, what do you want to do? I'm warning you, you'd better not mess around, if you dare to mess around. What if I dare to act recklessly? Lin Yu stared straight at the smile at the corner of Sidhu's mouth, which began to become more and more obvious. At this time, Sidhu certainly understood that he was at a disadvantage. Now he could only obey Lin Yu's command, otherwise, he might really have to answer here today. Tell me, what are your conditions? Lin Yu looked at Sidhu, take out any good things yourself. It's the thing that bought your life anyway. It's up to you. If I'm not moved enough, then I'm afraid you'll be in trouble today. At this time, Sidhu was so angry that his teeth were itching when he saw Lin Yu like this. His eyes were fixed on Lin Yu's body, and in his eyes, there was a hint of anger between his eyebrows. The murderous aura began to become more and more intense. Boy, you want to rip me off, but do you know that if you dare to rip me off, you will die? Sidhu was staring straight at Lin Yu, but at this moment Lin Yu didn't care at all. He just spread his hands and smiled. What? If you don't believe what I said, then how about the two of us just ride on a donkey and read the songbook? We'll see what happens next. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 259. Although Sidhu was furious at this moment, he clenched his fists and gritted his teeth, but there was nothing he could do. Okay, what do you want? I can promise you. At this time, Lin Yu also laughed like this. Wouldn't it be better if it was just like this? I have no other requirements, I just want you to give me something useful. Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on Sidhu. At this time, Sidhu looked at Lin Yu like this. For a moment, he really didn't know what Lin Yu wanted. In addition, this Lin Yu, although his cultivation is very weak, his attainments in formations are so high. After struggling for a moment, Sidhu took out a formation disc. At this time, he gritted his teeth as if he was cutting flesh, closed his eyes, and handed the formation disc directly to Lin Yu. This is the formation disc used by Fuxi when he deduced the 64 innate hexagrams. It is called Yin and Yang. It can seize the opportunity of heaven and earth and participate in the creation of the sun and the moon. However, this formation disc is somewhat incomplete, so it cannot be used for the time being. Lin Yu's eyes shone when he saw this array disc. At this time, his eyes were full of excitement. He began to fumble carefully. This array disc seemed to be caressing his lover's body. Same as skin. Lin Yu smiled. Okay, if that's the case, Let's put this matter aside for the time being. I'll leave first. I look forward to seeing you next time. When Sidhu heard Lin Yu say this, he almost spit out a mouthful of blood. At this time, Sidhu quickly waved his hand, "Never see you again, never see you again." At this moment, Lin Yu, seeing Sidhu's expression of pain, knew that such a thing must be worth a lot of money. "I've made a profit this time." Although Lin Yu's voice was low, Sidhu could understand clearly. After Sidhu heard what Lin Yu said, at this moment, she even wanted to die. After a moment, Lin Yu turned around and left. After Lin Yu left, the white-haired young man appeared in front of Sidhu. The white-haired young man just shook his head and smiled, and then sighed leisurely. Sidhu glanced at the white-haired young man angrily. "Is my school beauty pretty?" The white-haired young man smiled, with a special color in his eyes, and then he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows slightly. "Now you understand what it means that it is easy to invite gods, but it is difficult to send them away." Sidhu turned his head and glanced coldly at the white-haired young man. "If you hadn't insisted on trapping this white tiger, how could there be so many causes and effects behind it? You still have the nerve to laugh." Of course the white-haired young man knew that Sidhu was probably angry. He turned his head and glanced at Sidhu, and then shook his head. "Those things originally belonged to him, so what does it matter if someone takes back his own things? But no one else can take your things away. It shouldn't be yours. You should have returned it to others." Sidhu was also angry at the time and didn't know what to say. "You bastard, you know how to talk to me these useless nonsense, now you better think of a way to deal with the guys in that place." A hint of helplessness flashed through Sidhu's eyes, and a wry smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. The white-haired young man certainly understood what the place Sidhu was talking about was, and at this moment, he couldn't help but feel dumb for a while. "Oh, it can't be said. It can't be said. Some things can't be explained or explained, so it's hard to say. Some things are indeed difficult to say, but this little guy is not from this time and space. He must have been brought back by the time and space beast. If we still have future generations, maybe we are not destroyed yet." After Sidhu heard what the white-haired young man said, his eyes flashed a little, and then he nodded heavily. "Is what you said true?" The white-haired young man rolled his eyes at Sidhu angrily. "Do you think I meant to lie to you?" The two people just looked at each other and smiled. After waiting for this moment, a mysterious aura quietly appeared in the distance. At this moment, the two of them looked at each other, and their expressions suddenly became tense. After waiting for this moment, the two of them looked at each other and sighed heavily. "It can't be said, it can't be said." After getting this formation disk, Lin Yu carefully looked at it and looked at it. The patterns on the yin and yang formation disk were very simple, which was consistent with the principle that simplicity is the most important thing. After groping for a while, just a fleeting scene and a mysterious and obscure aura quietly emerged. The power of yin and yang between heaven and earth began to gather together quietly at the same time, and the breath of luck in this world also quietly began to fall into the fast formation disk, gathering like this. Lin Yu's cultivation was still shallow, and of course he would not understand such mysterious changes in the world, but Baihu could see it clearly, and Arya seemed to understand it, so she wanted to remind Lin Yu at this time. But at this time, Arya just opened her mouth to speak, but was interrupted by Baihu, who shook his head. Knowing too much now may not be a good thing for him. I know you want to help him, but you don't have to tell him everything. After hearing what Baihu said, Arya thought for a moment and really didn't say anything more. At this moment, Baihu seemed to understand something, just smiled, and didn't say anything more. After a while, Lin Yu suddenly remembered that his leg strength was definitely not as good as Baihu's, and he also remembered what Baihu had promised him before. At this time, Lin Yu just smiled. Baihu sensed Lin Yu's smile, and suddenly had a bit of ominous premonition in his heart. "What are you laughing at? What do you think?" Cute little white tiger. At this time, Baihu was also confused and didn't understand what Lin Yu meant by this. I don't understand what you want to say. Don't think about cheating. You promised me that as long as I break this formation, you will take us to the North Sea. Are you going to go back on your word now? Baihu just smiled and said, okay, I promise you. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Chang. Chapter 260. The white tiger also thought that Lin Yu was quite cute, so he appeared directly in front of them. The white tiger was huge and boundless, and Lin Yu just straddled it and stood on the tiger's head. The white tiger seemed to be quite displeased and roared, and all the fish around him hid in panic at the bottom of the deep sea. Look at you, you've disturbed all these fishes, and they're making random noises. This is what you promised in the first place, so hurry up and leave. Baihu was also on the verge of crying for a while, but he thought that he had indeed agreed before, so he led Lin Yu quietly towards the front and swept away like this. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu couldn't help but shake his head and smile. After seeing Lin Yu like this, Baihu rolled his eyes at Lin Yu angrily. I really don't understand why you are so arrogant and arrogant. Lin Yu's eyes were staring straight at Baihu. At this time, after Baihu heard what Lin Yu said, he also sighed leisurely, with a bit of helplessness in his eyes. I mean, there was also a bit of a wry smile on the corner of my mouth. It's hard to say it all, it's hard to say it all. When Lin Yu heard Baihu say this, a bit of confusion flashed in his eyes. At this time, he couldn't help but shook his head. What's going on? What is it? At this time, Baihu's eyes and brows showed a look of helplessness. He just turned his head and glanced towards Lin Yu, with a wry smile on his lips. Everything in the world is always difficult. When you saw me like this just now, it was just to scare off those Xiao Xiao disciples. When Lin Yu heard Baihu say this, a bit of surprise flashed in his eyes, and then he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows slightly. What exactly do you mean by this? I still don't quite understand. Lin Yu's eyes stared straight at Baihu, a strange color flashed in his eyes, and then he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows slightly. The white tiger smiled, then roared, and a moment later, a water dragon slowly floated up, but the water dragon looked dead at the moment. After Lin Yu saw this scene, a bit of surprise flashed in his eyes, and then he turned his head and glanced towards Baihu. He just shook his head and smiled. Laughed. I didn't expect it. I actually didn't expect you to have such abilities. It's amazing. It's amazing. The white tiger just hooked his hand gently and smiled. Where? Lin Yu raised his eyebrows slightly, and a special light flashed in his eyes. If you have it, you have it, and if you don't have it, you have nothing. It's just hard to put it into words, but you can't explain it clearly. The two people just looked at each other and smiled. The white tiger seemed to understand something at this moment. He turned his head and glanced at Lin Yu. Come up. Lin Yu stood on top of the tiger's head. The white tiger no longer had any complaints. The two of them rushed forward like this. Their speed was extremely fast. In just an instant, they disappeared from the horizon. The white tiger traveled 1,000 miles with each passing day, and Lin Yu looked quite majestic when he stepped on the tiger's head. Lin Yu couldn't help but shake his head at that moment, with a few meaningful smiles on the corners of his mouth. It's interesting. It's really interesting. You little guy has pretty good legs. If I ask you to rush in the future, it will definitely save a lot of time. And just a moment later, when Baihu heard what Lin Yu said, 3 black lines appeared on his forehead, and he was speechless for a while. Anyway, I will not be at your mercy in the future. Don't forget the two of us. The agreement between people was just a helpless act before I recognized you as the master. I advise you to make your status clear. Baihu just said it unhurriedly. At this moment, after Lin Yu heard Baihu say this, 3 black lines appeared on his forehead. He turned his head and glanced at Baihu coldly. "What are you talking about?" At this time, Baihu was also speechless for a while, and then he smiled at Lin Yu. "Nothing, nothing." Baihu also knows one truth very well, that is, people have to bow their heads under the roof. After all, they are under others now, so they still have to be more honest. At this time, when Lin Yu heard Baihu say this, he also smiled like this, and there was no more to say about the rest. But just after this moment, Lin Yu's brows knitted together because he felt that the area in front seemed to be quite dangerous. Lin Yu's face was slightly condensed, and his eyes were quite solemn. At this time, he turned his head and glanced towards Baihu. "What is in front of you?" After Baihu heard what Lin Yu said, he was slightly startled, and then he sighed heavily. "Well, there is the real Sea of Biming in front of you, but now you have also discovered that Biming the sea seems not as simple as you imagined." After Lin Yu heard Baihu say this, a special color arose in his eyes. Finally, his brows knitted together and a wry smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "It is indeed not as simple as imagined, but what exactly is going on in the Sea of Biming? Can you explain it in detail?" Lin Yu turned his head and stared directly at Baihu. Baihu was also a little frightened by Lin Yu's gaze, so Hu Bian began to speak unhurriedly. Lin Yu always felt as if the white tiger had been brought to the wrong place, because the place was very chaotic, and the aura was quite similar to the white tiger. When Baihu saw Lin Yu staring at him like this, his face became a little ugly. At this time, he also had a wry smile on his lips.